everybody. Welcome back to episode 7 of Wise Words with Maddie and Nina. Today we have a special guest. Introduce yourself
My name is Dr. Kristen Holmes.
and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I am the global head of human performance, principal scientist at a company, a technology company called Whoop, WHOOP. And we make a physiological monitoring device that's used by all sorts of folks all over the world. Some of the very best athletes like Cristiano Ronaldo and Patrick Mahomes and Michael Phelps and Sue Bird, and the list goes, Rory McIlroy, the list goes on and on and on, Charlie McAvoy. But what's really cool is that in addition to serving elite athletes, we now serve the regular Janes and Joes of the world. So we're really we've become a global brand and are impacting people's lives all over the world every day.
When and how did you first get into Whoop?
So I was before Whoop. So I've been at Whoop for 9 years. So I've been, which is crazy to think. But prior to that, I was at Princeton University, where you're heading.
Yeah.
And I was the head field hockey coach. And, part of my mission was to help my student athletes maximize their potential on and off the field. And I became really interested in various ways we could quantify their readiness to perform. We were tracking lots of different metrics. So we were looking at, in practice, GPS. So really trying to understand if the load that they're putting on their body was really serving them at a very basic level. And what I found is that in practice, we were quantifying a lot of stuff, but it didn't necessarily predict how they showed up tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to design practices in ways that would really allow them to stay safe and healthy, knowing that, over the course of the season, keeping your athletes safe and healthy is how you win championships, mm-hmm. right? Yeah, so I became really interested in how do I keep my athletes really as healthy as possible so they can show up to train with capacity. And so the technology that I was using was just a little deficient. And what I came to realize is because I was quantifying just the couple hours in practice, but really what I found actually dictates how you show up and predicts next day capacity is what's happening the other 22 hours of the day, which I didn't have any insight into. Yeah. So I began developing my own technology. I raised $250,000. Wow. And I started a company called Actus, and which is action in Latin. And the idea was I really wanted to try to understand or kind of develop technology that allowed me to quantify not just in practice load, but life load, 24 hours. So I raised this money. I hired statistics machine learning, some PhD students at Princeton in computational biology, statistics machine learning, large language modeling. And we basically built algorithms around sleep and recovery and mental health. And I got all the way through beta. And that's when I met the founder and CEO at Whoop. And they ended up buying my IP.
Wow. So how long had Whoop been a thing until you joined?
So I joined, 9 years. They were founded in 2012. So they had been kind of going for 3 years when I joined.
Wow. So you're right in the beginning.
Super early. Yeah. So they didn't pay me cash. They paid me with options, which could work out really well, hopefully, if we IPO. But yeah, it was great. I mean, it was so hard to leave Princeton because my team was amazing. We were so successful, and I just loved the energy there, and it was phenomenal. But I kind of felt this calling, to try to evangelize this concept of recovery, which is basically your capacity it's a kind of a quantifiable measure of your capacity to take on external load. And I was like, God, I feel like everyone in the world needs this, not just because I was thinking, of course, athletes, but the frontline healthcare clinicians, the military operators, there's just the everyday person who's just trying to show up in their life with energy and joy and, and just live their values, recovery is such a central component to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was the most important thing you got out of being a coach at Princeton?
I think that, it's more than just the X's and O's.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the part of coaching that I loved the most was just, you know, just being a part of my student athletes lives, and just being able to kind of go on this journey together. And of course, field hockey was our shared kind of mission and what brought them there and what brought me there, and so there's that commonality. But it was just really, I think for me, like being able to see them thrive and realize their dreams and kind of pursue the things that they really cared about in their life. I mean, that gave me so much joy.
How did you start to become a coach there?
So I played two sports in college. I went to the University of Iowa, so Big Ten.
Yep.
Go Hawks. And I played field hockey and basketball, and I made the U.S. national team my sophomore year.
Whoa.
And so I was competing for the U.S. And I just like honestly always loved the tactical side of the game. Like I loved the strategy. Like I would be the person who'd be like scouting Korea, and my coaches would be like, "You can go to the hotel. Like we got this." I'm like, "No." Like like just tracking like ball patterns and like in movement. And I just it's funny because it's so much like soccer. Feel like tactically, right? So there's there's counter defense and counter attack and pressing structures, outlet, right? And I just loved shapes and love seeing them form. And I love like a real kind of super high intensity, aggressive, 360-degree of pressure, like type of like defense. But then I love like just the passing and the spacing and, so anyway, I just loved that aspect. And then I love teaching. Like I just from like the time I was in high school, like I love like transferring information. And so I actually became the head coach of the U19 national team when I was a senior in college.
Wow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that
either. They were kind of like close to my age, but
I feel like that's kind of good in a way.
Yeah,
it you can like relate to them more.
For sure. Yeah, I think so. And so I think what I loved about it is it actually made me a better player.
Yeah,
When you have to describe a skill and a tactical kind of strategy, it totally changes how you approach your own game. So I feel like the coaching actually made me a much better player. Like it accelerated my wisdom around my own play. But I think I just like loved coaching. And so I even so the entire time, my whole 7-year career playing, I was coaching in parallel. I was the assistant coach at my alma mater. Kind of right after graduation, I actually I played professionally in England for 7 months.
Oh wow!
And was coaching there. I was coaching at a local college and coaching in the club I was playing for. And then when I got back home, I started coaching at my alma mater, Iowa. And I did that for 3 years, and then I launched my own business called Champion's Edge, which I ran for 17 years.
Oh my gosh!
Which is a national camp and coaching course. It was actually the first model where you'd hire coaches and they would travel to the sites. So I had 17 different locations.
Wow.
Yeah, like all over the world.
Oh my god.
All over the country. We actually did do some foreign as well. But anyway, so I was kind of starting this business, and then Princeton called.
Yeah.
And they asked me to interview for the job, and I was like so naive because I was really young, just right out of college. And I became the youngest Division I head coach.
Wow,
really?
Yeah,
that's so crazy.
Yeah, Erin Matson has trumped me. She's she's at UNC and coaching now, so she's really young.
She started coaching, I think, right after when she graduated.
She's got to be like maybe 23. I think I was 24.
She's pretty,
yeah.
Well, you were still very young.
I was young
when you did
it. and like my athletes were like not that much younger, and not much, it was not that much older than them, but yeah, and I was at Princeton for 13 seasons.
Wow. How was it competing like for the country? Like what would you say like you felt when you were doing that?
It was honestly, it wasn't until I didn't, it was like such a complicated time because my mom was really sick. And so I was kind of like always grappling with that in the background. And so I always I don't think I ever could like fully like appreciate
like what you've done.
I kind of like was always in a space where like half my brain was kind of occupied with just thinking about my mom, and like, and knowing that she was sick and not doing well. And So yeah, so it was kind of like in some ways like a little bit of a dark time.
Yeah.
You know, that said, I mean, competing for my country, it was literally, you know, since I even became aware that there was a US field hockey team, like I that was like the moment I went, you know, I woke up in the morning to the moment I went to bed, that's all I thought about. Like I trained
Yeah.
all the time, you know, like I just like that's all I did was train. And then, you know, and then you make it and you're like, you know, you're kind of like, okay, I made it.
And
Now
like,
what?
now
Kind
what?
of
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
like now, oh wow, it's a real grind, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, just like the training. I mean, we trained so hard. I mean, we would talk about like load management. There was none of that. I mean, I can't even remember like a day where I wasn't like my legs weren't like heavy and tired but yeah, I mean, it was a phenomenal experience, you know, World Cup, Pan American Games, you know, it's just like it was incredible.
Yeah, wow. That's like something I feel like a lot of people would love to achieve in their life, whether whatever sport they're doing. I feel like that's so cool that you were able to do that. And
Yeah.
now like and then start coaching from it and then like started with your business and now you're at Whoop. Like I feel like that's so like a like progressive like journey that you took. I feel like
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thread throughout it was very much around, you know, I think probably because like my whole life I really gravitated toward like people who could excel at things, you know, and I think so. I think in my mind, like I was always like, God, how do we actually maximize our potential as human beings? And like the science behind that is really, you know, is what kind of I think propelled a lot of my academic pursuits, right, in parallel. So, you know, I have my master's is in exercise physiology and sports psychology, kind of and then my PhD was in psychology. And but I think throughout all of that, you know, it was really about understanding, okay, what are the psychological constructs that allow us to kind of show up with the right kind of attentional capacity and energy production and motivation, you know, and what are the physiological things that move that around. So my whole entire life I've been building this model of human performance that basically takes into account the physiology and the psychology, and then kind of layered underneath of that is like, how do we actually quantify these things? You know, how do we quantify the mental side? How do we quantify the physiological side? And with the idea that if we can understand the factors that influence our energy production, our attentional capacity, our motivation, we can then understand how to apply our effort. You know, so we don't have to guess, right, about like how do I actually achieve my potential? Like there's, you know, we don't really have to guess.
When you headed into Iowa, was this like something that you kind of knew that you wanted to do and study, or was it something that just gradually came along?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually, so I think when I was 15 or 16, I was gifted this book by Terry Orlick. It's called In Pursuit of Excellence. And that kind of like really got me down this path of thinking like, wow, there's actually a kind of a defined path to excellence, you know? And so I like literally carried that book around in my backpack for probably 6 years. It was kind of like my Bible. And then I became aware of this guy called Jim Loehr, who I actually had I was able to interview him on a podcast, which is like my dream. You know, I was just like, oh my God, Dr. Loehr. But he was actually the first guy he was kind of like the first sports psychologist. And he wrote many books. And so I was like devouring his books. So I really was, and he was more on the physiology side. So I think for me, I always was like, okay, it's not just about the psychology. It's not just about the physiology. It's the psychophysiology. And that's really why I became a psychophysiologist, because oftentimes these two domains of expertise are very much separate. But as an athlete and a coach, yeah, I was like, we can't, you cannot separate the mind and the body and the body and the mind. Like it's not possible. They're so intricately related, and there's so many correlations, and you know, so I really went down the path of like studying both. That said, my undergrad, I was a political scientist. I majored in political science, anthropology and French, which is so random. I tried to do biology, but it was like it conflicted with my practice times, the labs, so I couldn't do it. That's why Princeton's amazing. Everything stops 4 to 6, and that's when you practice. Yeah. Wow. So you never have to pick class over practice. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that was one of my big selling points when I was recruiting there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I always knew that I was, kind of in the background, I was always
Mhm.
kind of looking at these, but it wasn't until I started coaching that I was like, wow, I need to like build my skills in
Yeah.
the area of like sports psychology and physiology so I can, because we had good resources at Princeton, but at the time, my athletes were being trained like football players. There
Yeah.
wasn't like gender specific kind of
Mm.
biosex specific
Mhm.
training.
Mm.
So I was like, it didn't feel right in my gut, and then
Yeah.
I knew how I was trained. I was trained like a football player. And I'm like, this is not how, women are different. We're not
Yeah,
small men.
yeah.
So we need to be, so I really started digging into the exercise physiology. And so I could so I could get my athletes playing the style that I wanted them to play. I
Yeah.
wanted them to be super fast and
Mm.
quick and like, and that meant, lifting differently than what they were prescribing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of went down my own path to figure that out.
Hmm. What did it take for you when you were playing field hockey as an athlete to get like to the national level? Like what
Mm.
extra stuff did you do? I know you said you trained all the time. Like what did
Yeah.
that mean for you like during like
Yeah.
every day?
I mean, I think for me, like, I mean, it's not that I wasn't social, but I took my own rest really seriously.
Mhm.
Like, I would never go out and compromise my training next day.
Yeah.
Like I was always, like I really thought, like, I was just the achieving athletically was more important to me than anything that kind of was happening
Yeah.
socially.
Yeah.
I know
No,
that's not
no,
for
like no,
everyone, and
it's
not
fine.
that was
Yeah.
just for me because it's not that I wasn't talented, yeah, I'm talented, but when you get to that level, you know, they can only pick 16, for a
Yeah.
tournament, like and it's super competitive, and like I felt like that gave me confidence that that was kind of my edge,
Mm.
like if I knew that I was shutting things down at a reasonable time, being able to wake up, be alert, like I did not drink in
Mhm.
college. I mean, alcohol is just absolutely going to crush your capacity.
Yeah.
So I just was like, I just didn't drink in college.
Mm.
So I
What?
made those kind of choices,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Um now like that you're in Whoop, what is like one of the biggest things that you like preach almost to other people? Like one of the you like hit on so many different topics,
Mm.
but is there something that's like you think is the most important for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think a couple like important principles. Number one, figure out who you aspire to be in the world. I think what keeps people from their potential is they have, fuzzy desires,
Mhm.
right? Get really clear on who you want to be in the world. And when you're young, that's going to evolve and change, right? And it should. And you need to give give yourself space to evolve and change. But at the core, I think of every human is, a set of values, right? What is your belief structure? And making sure that your behaviors align with who you say you want to be, I think, is one of the most important aspects of the human experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you um, I think there's a lot of anxiety in the world because we're looking around for to other people to give us evidence or proof of who we are. You know who you are. It's inside you.
Yeah.
And I don't think we take the time to look inside to actually figure out who we want to be in the world. So we end up flinging ourselves in all sorts of directions, mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Mhm.
And I think getting clear on who you are and who you want to be, and then aligning your behaviors accordingly is probably one of the most important kind of foundational aspects of kind of a happy, thriving life.
Mm. What is like a day in your life at Whoop?
Mm.
Like what do you do? What do you do like when you go to work?
Yeah.
Like what kind of work do you do during the day?
Yeah. So I do a ton of research. Um, and, this will kind of piggyback on the question that you just asked, Maddie, about kind of what's important. Um, I look at basically behaviors. I study, research behaviors that impact um, our physiology and impact our psychology. So I kind of look at the interrelationships between our psychological processes and physiological responses.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's kind of that like kind of psychophysiological
It's like
lens.
a pair type.
Yeah. So basically, for example, if I am underslept and underfueled and underhydrated, how is that going to impact my psychological functioning? Right. If I have a lack of control, if I feel really homesick, how does that impact my sleep and my heart rate
Mhm.
variability, for example. So, understanding the relationship between these things can give people insight into, oh, wow, this is actually getting in the way of my ability to live my values,
Yeah.
right? With more
Mhm.
joy and more energy. So it's kind of helping people understand the input and how that's impacting their physiology and their psychological functioning.
You
So I
travel
spend a lot of time
you
studying
travel a
that.
decent amount, right?
I do,
What do
yeah.
you do when you like? Because what do you do when you go?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, so I'll do kind of consulting work with military,
Mhm.
professional athletes and organizations, and I work with frontline healthcare as well. So kind of high stakes, high stress environments, and I will help them understand these factors of human performance, and I help them understand how to use their data to get better outcomes.
Yeah.
So whether that's performance outcomes, health outcomes, usually a combination of the two, help them understand how to interpret their data, how to think about the data in the context of load management. If I'm working with a professional team,
Mhm.
for example, a professional athlete. And so, yeah, so the travel usually is related to some sort of consulting with, an organization that is interested in getting, you know, the advice on, on the technology, how to apply it. But then also just kind of these other high performance constructs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the coolest like person or organization that you've worked with and you've really like, I guess like learned more about? I guess like what do you like to
Yeah.
do? What's your most fun experience you've
Yeah.
had?
I mean, I really Florida State University has been
Yeah,
like
that's so
such a
cool.
fun
Yeah.
relationship because I worked with softball and volleyball and soccer really intensely, for almost 7 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so they were really early adopters, and I just felt like they really they all just bought in,
Yeah.
to the technology, and I basically set up all of the load management for those three teams.
Yeah.
So using the technology, using that feedback, the athletes were able to really stay healthy. We have, just the amount of injuries and illnesses, it's crazy. They don't get sick, they don't get injured.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, that's one of
Yeah.
the reasons why they're winning championships, and
Exactly.
in all three of those sports, is because they're just healthy. And there's a great study by these two dudes, Ray Smith and Drew. It was published in 2016, and it looked at track athletes in Australia over the course of 5 years. And what they found is that um, 80 availability to train and compete explained 86% of successful individual and team success.
Wow.
Wow.
So literally just showing up, being available to train and compete explained 86% of team and individual success.
Wow.
Is that
That's
wild?
so
Yeah.
So just
crazy.
like keeping your athletes healthy, there's actually nothing more important. Like you might get beat by a talented team,
Yeah.
right? A team that's more talented, but in terms of like losing to a lesser talented
Yeah,
team
yeah, yeah.
or not maximize your potential as a team and as individuals, like it just, and that's one of the reasons why I think my teams were so successful. I mean, we won 12 Ivy League championships in
Yeah.
13
Yeah. Wow.
seasons.
That's insane.
Like the next, we, I'm the winningest coach in the history of the Ivy League of any sport.
Mhm.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait,
Wow.
that's a fun fact. I didn't know
I
that.
I
the
didn't
next
either.
the next best team was football. They won 10 in
Uh-huh.
30 years.
So
I
it's
won 12 in 13
that's crazy.
Wow.
and a national championship. But the only reason I say that is because we understood the factors that move around your health
Yeah.
and well-being,
Yeah.
right? And we quantified those things, and we made the athletes aware,
Yeah.
okay, that hey, we know this is going to move around your ability to perform. Okay, so alcohol, right,
Yeah.
is a big one, right? Sleep weight consistency,
Mhm.
time in bed, all these things really move around your ability to kind of show up and stay healthy, right? So I'm like, all right, if we're aware of these things and we can do them on average, we don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's not like my kids didn't go out, didn't drink. They did, right? But we were super smart about like kind of programming for that
Mhm.
too, like just like we program workouts, we program out social time too,
Yeah.
so they could be like college athletes, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't get in the way of what they said was important to them,
Yeah.
which was, winning championships and staying healthy and sickness free.
Sure.
So, but a big reason why we were so successful is literally we just stayed healthy.
Yeah.
It's a big piece of it.
Do you think a lot of programs and college teams and professional teams, do you think
a lot of them have adapted to this like
Mm.
new
They're leaving
research
so
type.
much on the table. So I'm inside these organizations all the time, and I would say like high performance is hard. Like performing at a high level consistently requires you to make choices, and oftentimes people aren't willing to, not watch that fourth show on Netflix and go to bed. They're going to watch the fourth show on Netflix and they're going to eat Sour Patch Kids while they do it. And as a result, they're going to wake up hypoglycemic at 2 a.m. True story. Pelican. This is actually a funny story. So with this guy that I worked with, so you're kind of Florida State was great, and then my other one I worked with an NBA basketball player. He played for the Pelicans, and his whole life he was waking up in the middle of the night with like night sweats, like sheets soaking wet. And, and so I was working with her team and I'm like, hey, dude, like your sleep really could use some work.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, he's like, I just wake up in like a sweat like every night. I'm like, okay. And so we just started like peeling back like his behaviors. And sure enough, like he would have like literally a bag of Sour Patch Kids. So he would wake up with like a sugar crash around 2
Oh my
a.m., like
God.
sweating. And his nutritional profile was like really bad. So I'm like, all right, and he was kind of always like had niggles, was getting injured. And anyway, we cleaned up his diet, and made some other adjustments, started sleeping he literally slept through the night for the first time in his entire life.
Wow.
Yeah. And then started seeing like, holy cow, like he's already
Like
so
results,
talented.
yeah.
And he started like really playing well. Anyway, he ended up making the all-star team in February. So I started working with
Wow.
August. Yeah. And he's one of those things where he had the potential, but it
Yeah.
was just like understanding the impact of some of these behaviors,
Yeah.
until you really can make these associations, right? And the data was just so clear. He's like, wow, I had no idea that my sleep was so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy was getting like less than 4 hours of sleep a night.
Wow.
I know. When
How
you
did
look
he,
at,
like,
he was spending
How
time
did
in
he
bed.
How do you
function?
do that?
That's it. That's the thing. Like when you think about the factors of human like potential, you've got the genetic capacity, skills and expertise, and lifestyle. So everyone at that level, I mean, you guys hit the genetic lotto, right? You, in terms of genetic capacity, you are at the very tip of the spear, just like this guy was, right? But what's going to determine whether you can leverage that genetic capacity and that skills and expertise is how you live every day,
Yeah.
right? And the big things that move that needle are when you go to bed and when you wake up, making that as consistent as possible. That is in the data beyond clear and shows up in every single piece of research that I do. And that is related to your circadian rhythms. Okay, you want to have aligned circadian rhythms. And when you have aligned circadian rhythms, you create this beautiful foundation that anything you layer on top of that is going to be enhanced. When you have a lot of misalignment, anything you layer on top is going to be inefficient. So that's really the baseline so when I go in and talk to military operators, frontline healthcare, professional athletes, we try to like optimize for that the best that we can given their constraints. It's not perfect, but we try to create as much circadian alignment as possible. And then we work on sleep, because sleep does not have a circadian rhythm, but it's an output of the circadian clock. So if you want to fix your sleep, you got to fix your circadian rhythms. So that's the timing of eating. So my basketball player, right? Like generally speaking, we become really insulin resistant the later the day goes on. So close to bedtime, we're not primed to metabolize food. So with this guy at the basketball team, I was like, listen, like you're hungry at night. I get it. Let's have a high protein, kind of low carbohydrate type of, high fat, like a good fat, like walnuts and berries. He hired a nutritionist because he makes a gazillion dollars. So, we put together something that I really liked. But it basically was just protein, like casein protein. And that actually helps muscle protein synthesis when you're really active during the day. So it was like a great solution for him. So it doesn't mean you can't eat, but generally speaking, we're not primed to kind of digest during the inactive phase of the circadian rhythm. So there's just things like this that are, these levers that, really impact our ability to perform at a high level. And when you become aware of them, you can take control of them, and then you can kind of choose your level of performance, But I think when you really think about maximizing your genetic capacity, it's all about the choices that you make.
What's one of the craziest things that you've like learned from your research, or like most surprising?
Yeah, there's lots. I mean, I think the biggest thing that just shocks me is like, I said it, like how important like a stable sleep wake time is.
Mm.
Like it sounds like so like it wouldn't be that important, but it plays an outsized role in every performance metric that we track. Like it's like the more variable your sleep wake time, like the less accurate your free throws, the slower you are, it just like every performance metric is impacted. Not to mention your academic performance is impacted too.
Mm.
There was a study published by Andrew Phillips in 2017 that basically showed, and it was done with students at Harvard, but the one reliable predictor of GPA was the degree to which students had stable sleep wake time.
Yeah.
It's wild, right?
Wow, yeah.
I think the other thing is the impact of like alcohol. It's just like it crushes your resting physiology, so and sleep. So just to kind of see like the impact of that. And the other thing that we found is that alcohol doesn't just to get back to baseline, it takes about 5 days. The other really surprising thing that we found is that the really high fit people actually are way more efficient sleepers because I think there a lot of sleep scientists would say the more you work out, the longer you have to spend in bed, and we actually don't see that in the data. The fitter you are, actually the less time you spend in bed, but your sleep is more efficient.
Yeah.
And that's
Mm.
why
It's better sleep.
it's better sleep. And the really low fit people have really low quality sleep and are probably more inflamed and have like, other things that their body is having to cope with, right? And can only do it during sleep. And their sleep is less efficient. So they actually end up spending more time in bed.
Yeah.
That was another really surprising. We haven't published that yet, but we're working on that paper right now. Yeah.
Is there like any like correlation between your sleep and when you work out? Like say you work out before you go to bed. Does that like help you sleep better?
Okay, so we just published a paper called it's around exercise dose and timing and how it impacts your sleep, and we found that high intensity work before bed fragments sleep.
Oh.
You have a less restorative sleep experience.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. If you're doing low intensity, doesn't seem to impact.
Mm.
But yeah, but high intensity close to bed is going to negatively impact your sleep.
Yeah.
If it is high intensity workout, when would you say like the best time it would be to do it?
Generally speaking, during the active phase of your circadian rhythm, which is basically sun up, sundown. Yeah. And for your age, 4 p.m. is going to be when your temperature, and for me too, I guess, for the most part, most humans, our temperature starts to get at its peak at 4 p.m. Mm-hmm. That's the best time to lift. Cardiovascular, you can do anytime.
Okay.
Mm.
It seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's like,
yeah.
It's like
but to build
like
muscle, yeah.
sometimes, like as teenagers, obviously still in high school, it's hard to balance like your homework and then lifting, and then you have practices or you need to run and start our summer packets. Like I feel like stuff you do now, especially like at Whoop, is like really helpful for athletes and obviously just people in general to balance what they need to do and like when to do it and how certain things like affect like your sleep, for example. Like I feel like that's super beneficial to have.
Yeah.
Does that like make you like, I don't know if proud's the right word, but like cool, like proud to like be a part of something so like that benefits so many people?
Yeah. I think it's more of like, I think back to my student athletes, like I wanted them to feel empowered with the information, like, and I think that Whoop is kind of the ultimate self-empowerment tool. It's like, it's because everyone is going to react a little bit different. You're going to need a little bit more time in bed or less time in bed than Nina. And we all have different needs, right? And our physiologies are different. There's some core principles and we're kind of roughly the same, but there's enough variation that when you get feedback on your own physiology, you can make choices that are good for you, and optimized for you. So I think that's what I'm so excited about is, this idea that this data can help people make better choices that improve the trajectory of their health, and allow them to spend more time on the things that they really care about, at a level and a quality that feels really good.
Yeah. You got anything more?
I don't think so.
Okay. So at the end of all of our podcasts, we ask whoever we're podcasting their best piece of advice. So what's your best piece of advice for Maddie and I? It can be anything, whatever you want, anything.
Yeah. No one could be better at being you than you. So do you as hard as you can.
That's
I
you know, I like that too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast. Oh, I just turned it off. Thank you so much for being on our podcast.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
All right. Bye, guys.